These apps are functionally equivalent. They have the same feature set. They're written in two different ways. I can click on invoices. I can navigate to those invoices. I can add invoices. One of these apps is written entirely in JavaScript with React. The other one is written in TypeScript and has no client-side JavaScript at all. One of these apps has a backend, written in Dino. Both of these apps have the same feature set. One of these apps doesn't work without JavaScript enabled. Let's open DevTools for some fun. Let's disable JavaScript. Nothing renders. So the same thing here. Hey, my app still works. It's easy to stop here and make the claim that this is all you need to know for justifying progressive enhancement. But I think it's also easy for people to turn right back around and say, okay, Grandpa, when's the last time you actually disabled JavaScript in your browser? Both of these apps have routing solutions where there's something monitoring changes in the URL. The state is in the URL effectively. But one of these apps requires you to write that twice. It's the front-end solution, which you can see here. The front-end solution is implemented in React. So if we open that up, look at my app. Here's the code. I'm using React Router, pretty standard fare for client-side single-page applications. And here's my invoices ID route. Here's my root level route. And here's my component wiring for all of that stuff. Let's look at the HTMX version. Where's my routing? It's in my main TypeScript file. One of these apps has a backend. One of them doesn't. But it's the same functionality. I think a better framing for justifying why you might want to consider writing an app with HTMX is I don't need to write routing logic twice. Let's look at dependencies. I have some node modules in the left purely for end-to-end testing. Both of these apps use the same testing strategy, playwright end-to-end browser-based tests. But the one on the right, like how long do I have to scroll in this list to see the surface area for code and dependencies? And if we consider code and dependencies as a liability that impacts the amount of value that we can deliver to a client, there is a certain amount of risk that I undertake when I advocate strongly for this approach, the single page app approach, the React approach. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the HTMX side because this is a talk about HTMX. This is not a talk purely about the differences. What are the types of decisions that you need to think about when you're working in HTMX? In React, I need to think about client-side state. I'm not getting a full page reload. I'm getting fresh data from the browser every time. Or I'm not getting fresh data from the browser every time. I need to think about client-side routing. I need to learn hooks. I need to learn React context. I need to learn how information flows top-down through the component hierarchy in React. That's a lot. There's a lot. If you're starting web development, there's a lot there. What do I need to learn if I'm working with HTMX? I need to figure out how to route a request if HTMX is enabled and how to route a request if it's not, something like this. You install it by including a script tag in the head of your document, very similar to the old school web development approach. When you include that library in your head tag, HTMX is a JavaScript runtime, but to use it, you don't have to write JavaScript. You write HTML. So here's a good example. When I include the HTMX script in my head tag, my HTML elements gain the capability to become supercharged by adding some of these attributes. Some people might call this a declarative approach to programming. I can gain behavior that we're going to do anyway. I might write that in vanilla JavaScript with a non-click handler, an explicit JavaScript function that controls that behavior. In HTMX, I don't write JavaScript. You can, but you don't have to get quite a lot of value from functionality. So in this case, when the HTMX runtime that's loaded in the browser sees this hx-post attribute, it says I need to wire up a click handler such that when the user clicks on this button, an HTTP post request gets fired to that endpoint. And this attribute says when a response comes back from the server, I'm going to swap the outer HTML, replacing the button element that is on the screen. This is exactly how the HTMX example works. Here's my invoice list items with my raw markup. Here's my anchor tag. You'll notice it has a plain old href attribute so that if JavaScript is turned off, then this is what takes over. I can click around and navigate to those things. But then you'll also notice I have an hx-get. If you're familiar with turbolinks and Rails, this is what turbolinks does. It detects and intercepts click events on anchor tags, and it does partial replacement of the page so that it doesn't do full page replacement. And we can see that working if we look at the network tab. If I do this full click, there I got a full page document from the backend, and I can see that there's my full HTML document. But if we turn JavaScript back on, now when I navigate, what I'm expecting to see is an XHR, an XML HTTP request, AJAX. I can see that there. And now my response has a partial fragment. And that partial fragment represents this breadcrumbs component and the contents of the invoice. I'm showing you this so that you can understand the inner workings of it, but also so that we can have an accurate comparison of what is different about this approach. It's very much rooted in the fundamentals of HTTP. We have these behaviors that are occurring rooted in the fundamental tenets of HTTP and in RESTful principles. They're being augmented or super boosted with some headers and the extensions to HTML. And this is in service of making a decision on the server side. So the first place I can make that decision is for any given route. If we look at invoices ID, I'm going to go look up the invoice in the store based on that ID from my route parameter. I'm going to call my little render helper. That's going to check, hey, is this an HTMX request? If so, we're doing a full page reload. Where do we use that? Let's check. We use that in our invoice detail template. So on the React side, we have components as the boundary around all of these UI components. In old school web dev, we didn't do that. We just had templates and partials. This will be familiar to you if you've used Rails. But that decision that I have to make, right, on the React side, I have to think about hooks and dependencies and context and data fetching and XHRs and all of that stuff. I don't have to think about that here, but I do need to make a decision somewhere. So it's not like it's logic free. And the decision that I need to make, is this a boosted request that's coming from HTMX? Or is it a full page reload? Is JavaScript disabled? I need to use that decision and say, I'm going to extend my layout file, the body, the HTML head, all of that. Here's a block for the breadcrumbs so that I can update them with the local variable for the invoice ID. Here's my block for the invoice list, and here's another block for invoice detail. And each of those has that HX swap out of band attribute in it so that it knows where to slot into the DOM. If I'm not doing a full page reload, this is the most complicated case that I need to think about. Then I can just swap in the fragments that I need here, like this. There is some negotiation that I think would have to happen with your team. I'm building my framework from scratch. Could probably come up with an abstraction that takes care of this for you without too much effort. But the benefit that I get with doing this, irrespective of progressive enhancement and the fact that it works without JavaScript enabled, is I don't have to write things twice. And I can sprinkle these HTMX attributes in my HTML. My abstraction boundary becomes the DOM and HTML. I don't change the semantics of HTML attributes. I augment the capabilities. I'm not compromising on user experience. There's still dependencies in the chain, but the surface area of those dependencies is a lot smaller. I'm not re-implementing my router logic. I actually have a backend. I don't have a backend in the React app. And I think these types of questions are good to ask in our client work. Is the constraint of rich client application and React because it's got the inertia in the front end community? Does that mean we can't ever question that decision or that constraint? I don't think so. I think there's teams that are actually working with HTMX in legacy React. Because we're at the point now where React's been around long enough that I think there are many apps that are shipped that you can call legacy React. Create React app just got end of life. almost 10 years that React has been around. So there are legacy systems being written, which is great for us as consultants because it means we're going to be in business for a long time to come, remediating those legacy systems. It's worthwhile considering the constraints in your existing system, the choices that your client have made. It's worth having tools like HTMX in your toolbox. That's what I wanted to share with you.